For what it's worth, I think it's probably uh, an advantage to have something like that to have to work against. I think one of the reasons why the band tends to be, or has tended historically to work very slowly, was that we seem to require some sort of challenge to get us motivated. And certainly the wall came, although it was started initially, it was looking like a very long, drawn-out project. And it was only when we lost vast amounts of money and thought that we'd better do something about it and set off for France to really concentrate on getting the album made, that we really all threw ourselves into the thing 100%. I think this has certain parallels that, particularly as far as David's writing is concerned, that he really felt then pushed to produce work that was slightly different to his solo material. That, I mean, I think so. It would be true to say that for some time we slightly hedged our bets when we started recording, and there was always that belief that if really we didn't make a Pink Floyd album, then it wouldn't be. It would be something else. It would be a Nick Mason, Dave Gilmour album, or a Dave Gilmour solo album, or whatever. With this album, it was attacked from a very different angle from the sort of past couple of albums, where Roger's really been attacked it from the idea of having a story first, which is then set to music. And this album, really, the music came first, and then we struggled around rather to see if we could find a story for it, because that seemed necessary. And it took us a while to realize that, of course, it's not necessary, that we're not hidebound by the rules of the last album or whatever. But the collection of music does have a sort of theme or a style running through it, and you start looking for ways to try and express that, either through an album picture or titles or whatever. But there's no very clear, you couldn't possibly articulate what you want to show or say. So what you tend to do is you draw up endless lists of titles or ideas for pictures or whatever, and start running them through and seeing if anything sticks, really. Signs of Life was another possible album title, but at the end of the day, some things just seem right for a song title, others for an album title. And Momentary Lapse of Reason was the one that stuck, that it just, everyone could live with it. Well, there's certainly no deliberate attempt to go back to that. I take the point. I think there are certain similarities. I mean, you could simply argue that perhaps David's interested in the sort of subjects that Roger was attacking then, and still is. I mean, the recurring themes. I must say I hadn't sort of seen it like that, and I don't think David would say, oh yes, he referred to it. I think the interesting thing with Dark Side of the Moon, the similarity that I see, is that there's that sort of variety of track on the album, that there's been a tendency with, I'm thinking particularly perhaps of Wish You Were Here and The Wall, to have a sort of recurring theme musically that comes in and out, and sometimes knits the piece together and sometimes makes the pace of the thing slower because you're returning to a theme. And I think as in the same way as Dark Side of the Moon really moved through very different sort of rhythmic and musical changes, I think this album is slightly similar in that respect. It's relatively fast-paced by our standards. I think there's definitely a more hopeful edge to this. Very much reflects David's attitude rather than Roger's. It does reflect, to some extent, a real, I mean, much more so that the final cut was made in a very, very different atmosphere. And this does reflect the fact that we're not starting from scratch again. We still do have the history and all the rest of it. But we felt as though we had to make a major effort to get this record finished and completed and finished to the point where, I mean, God knows we worried about it. We just decided that we would use, whenever we wanted any little bit or little thing done in a particular way, we'd just do it and get on with it. and we wouldn't worry about it being just 3 people or anything like that, and we'd give the credits. We didn't want to sort of mess around and pretend that everything had been done just by us or anything like that. And I really enjoy it. I mean, there are tracks on the album that are in fact 2 drummers and things like that. And I think when you're playing with people of that caliber, I mean, think of Jim Keltner or Carmine, you learn so much. The way they do things is different to the way I'd do it. And so you can sit there and one can play time and the other can do the fills, or you play in unison and you're learning fills from them and so on. That perhaps is indicative of the attitude to the way this album was made rather than others. There was much more total concentration on each piece with who would be right for that, to play that part on that particular piece rather than, necessarily on every piece. It's a curious area, that whole business of these sort of large shows, because what's showmanship and what really does augment the music, and how, at what point is it just sort of silly and at what point is it really useful? I mean, I think when you're doing the big stadiums, what you're trying to do is bring everyone in to feel that they have some involvement with the show that's going on there. I mean, there's no doubt that the easier concerts to play are the sort of smaller ones, because you've got people's attention, they're there, they can hear, they can see, and all the rest of it. The big occasions, though, are about something else, I think. They're really mini rock festivals that I think there's a certain pleasure in people being there, which has very little to do with the band. It's actually the shared, enthusiasm for the band would almost, what happens after that is something else. I mean, you could play very badly and disappoint everyone, but it's much more a sort of enormous group therapy situation. And I think anything you can do to try and make people feel that this is what it's about. There's one thing going on down there, and it can come out of that stage and either be big enough to be seen from the back, because even a 6'4" man is a small ant upon that stage. Something big enough, or something that comes out in the auditorium or happens within it, or quadraphonic sound, I think is enormously helpful from that point of view. That it creates a sense of the audience is in the same space. Well, I think Roger was very much, or is very much, a storyteller. I mean, that's what he likes to do within the lyrics themselves and within the album format. Whereas David is much more interested in the music and the song in its own right. But if you get a writer, they tend to write in a particular style, or be favouring a particular idea through a period of time. So there's inevitably a link. I think it's a very, very good piece of songwriting, and I speak as an entirely unbiased person, of course. But it's that thing where you have a graphic idea, but it contains 2 meanings, and there's one that's clearly about learning to fly, and the other about growing up, really, of learning to take responsibility for yourself, or developing yourself as a human. That's probably our greatest battle, because the tendency is to push in everything, and including the kitchen sink, and then the problem is to try and take elements out without losing the nucleus of it. I think that's one of Bob Ezrin's great skills. He's a very useful man to have. He has had great respect for the band and the sound, but no respect for the individuals, which is really what you need. Even if he approves of an idea, he'll make you argue for it, which I also think is a good routine to go through, to justify why you do things rather than just let them go through because they're the first idea that sprang to mind. I think one of the interesting things about it is that I don't feel that it's been a burden. I think you could take quite a lot of important albums. I mean, Perhaps the best example of that would be Procol Harum and Whiter Shade of Pale, whose record, marvelous record, actually turned into a burden. For some reason, Dark Side never quite seems to have done that to us. And although we've produced records since, we don't seem to have been attacked on the grounds that it's not as good as Dark Side of the Moon. One would have to say that it's a whole combination of things that make an album particularly special, and that includes luck and time and place and all the rest of it. And it can be about the ideas, it can be about the technicalities of it. I think to some extent there are ideas contained technically that people are interested in. Music, I think one of the things is that that quite interests me is that we have a reputation as a sort of high-tech, expert band. And I think when people listen to this record carefully, they realize that actually it's made with very simple ingredients. We're not technically brilliant. It's most of the playing on it is as good as we can do, but that isn't the key to it. There's very little on it where people would say, "Oh God, how did they play that? Oh my God!" It's more about it's actually very thin layers of simple stuff rather than innumerable computers and alien life forces working to produce something. It was an enormously important part of our launching, really, because we became the sort of the sort of interesting new band, and the record companies thought they better sign us. And it was only when we had the beginnings of a hit record and was sent out to tour the country that everyone realized what a problem they'd got on their hands, because live, I mean, no one had a clue what was going on, and we were absolutely hated up and down England. The only place we could actually work was London. Everywhere else, they were into soul music at the time, and it was deeply, deeply awful. Some of the very earliest stuff that we did was working with a guy who was a lecturer at one of the art colleges in London and was interested in light and sound and that. And so we actually attacked it from a relatively intellectual end before we got involved in the sort of coloured slides and inks and so on, the classic light show. I haven't seen Syd for some years now. The last story was that he was living at home, but I think he really, unfortunately, he was a great songwriter, very nice guy, and I think he just was one of the casualties of the 60s. I mean, people are still interested in him, that's fair enough, but I think it's just one of those very sad things, and I don't think he's likely to do much more work. There came the point at which David and I sat and talked and said, yes, we are going to give it another go. I'd always maintained that I'd love to make another Pink Floyd record, but it was something I didn't want to see dead and buried. And David had always hedged around it, and I understand completely why. It was because he wasn't confident enough of his writing, because there was obviously an enormous history of things that Roger had written that were very good. I think he knew that musically he could cut it because he'd done so much in the original albums anyway. And so it took a while for him to feel that there was a nucleus of material that would make a record. And it was really once we'd sort of started on it, and I think I said, sort of agonized about whether really it would be a Pink Floyd record or not. And we started looking for elements that would make the sound and that sounded right and so on. And then we thought, well, let's ask Rick if he'd like to come back and see what it sounds like and so on. So Rick then arrived, and that contributed some more to it, and it began to sort of build like that. The battle isn't really entirely about the name. I mean, I think Roger felt very strongly that when he left, he'd like to fold the whole thing. I not think, I know that. But there was no doubt that we were certainly entitled to record as Pink Floyd. There was no argument about whether he should have the name. That was never under discussion. It was very much he'd left, but since he'd left, he didn't want us to carry on. I understand why he feels that. I mean, he does feel as though he did everything. And if you feel that, you feel it. I think the sort of, hopefully, the fairest way of putting it is that Roger announced when he sort of announced that he'd left and so on, that he felt that the band was creatively dead. And in this, I think he was absolutely right. It was dead, with him calling the shots. And what he hadn't really imagined, and probably finds a little difficult to get to grips with now, is that actually his leaving saved the band, and that regenerated it. And I think that probably is the fairest way of looking at it. And it's not as though Roger was creatively dead. He patently obviously isn't. He's still got enormous amounts of work to do and songs to write and shows to put on and all the rest of it. But I think so have we. They are very different in the style, almost, the way side one, side two are dealt with. Once we started trying to sort out where things lay, there was a lot of time spent working with not so much general order as sort of how one thing would flow into something else. And we messed around with it for a long time. And what we eventually ended up with were the two sides, but we didn't know which was side one and which was side two. There was complete sort of uncertainty there, because we would, in some ways, would have liked to have ended the album with On the Turning Away. And it was just, it was one of those things where you're juggling everything and you're saying, well, we can't actually do that because that unbalances the first side, and then the lengths are wrong for a record, things like that. So there's an element of compromise there in quite how we'd have ideally liked to lay it out. And for instance, when we perform it live, we'll reorder it again. I think probably at some point we will tackle a video, but we'll do it in an extremely sort of grudging way, because you lose the abstraction, you lose the opportunities for people to fit their own images and ideas to things. That is the drawback with videos. I mean, they can be so good that it doesn't matter, and they can be live videos, in which case it's not really a problem. I think that's the main reason why there's a wish to try and avoid being too specific in explaining the ideas behind lyrics, and in making videos. But I think it's also a fact of life that videos are part of record promotion. I don't think we feel that we're too grand to not get down into the marketplace and try and sell our record. Great fun. I mean, although one would like to maintain that really one doesn't care about critics or anything like that, one's far too old and grown up to worry about it, there's an enormous sense of yippee when people who've written the band off and said, oh, they're far too old, they're well past it, they couldn't do anything ever again. Suddenly there's a hit record. It's absolutely terrific. I feel as enthusiastic now as I've ever felt. That's all I can say. And I think if one's enthusiastic and producing stuff, after that it's just down to whether people want it or not. I mean, if people say, no thanks, you're stuck with it. You can only do what you do. You can't anticipate what people would like. You can't say, I think it's a sort of hopeless road, the road to ruin. All you can do is get on with whatever you do. And I really look forward, the next year specifically. I mean, I love playing live. I think for David and myself, that's a great release as well. The fact that we're no longer hampered with Roger, who was less keen on it. We can actually really set out and play places we haven't played for years and get to audiences we've never been to before. I think blah, 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 blah.